and welcome to A Brassy History. This is part one. The music you've heard there is from Henry VIII. It is Pastime with Good Company, and that's the place that we're going to start musically. But before we do, we're going to go even further back in time. We're going to go back to caveman days, and we're going to look at where did brass instruments come from. The first instruments we had were percussion instruments, because we would beat two rocks together and that would give us almost like a drum effect, and we could use that if we were wanting to get a baby to go to sleep, to slow down, bring the volume down, and that would gradually bring the heart rate down and relax the baby until they fall fast asleep. If you do that in the opposite and you want to get your heart rate going, you would have a beat going quite quick. And so gradually we started to discover that actually sound was really important. Brass instruments could have been made out of anything, animal horns, even, and this is gross, a human thigh bone. So brass instruments could be made out of anything. The thigh bone, as it kind of like rots away a little bit, all of the goo comes out the inside of it and it becomes a hollow tube, which is basically like one of our brass instruments today. So a hollow tube. And then all we do is if we put it to our lips, for some reason somebody in a cave decided to go, that's quite a nice noise. And all of a sudden it started to get used as a signalling instrument because it was something that could travel long distances. So if we blew it quite hard, we could travel it long distances. We could change what we were playing. You know, you could then start to send messages like ancient text messages. And actually human thigh bones have been used as instruments in religious services in Tibet, and they're still used today where they play thigh bone trumpets. It was all about sending messages. Now, they weren't made out of plastic, they were made out of animal horns, anything you can pick up, but as long as you had this flare effect, this kind of starting small and getting bigger bell effect here, it would carry a long way. So we would all have simple ringtones, a little bit like today. We've all got different message tones. So for example, you know, if you're out in the forest and you're hunting saber-toothed tigers with your pals and your mum wants you to come back to tea, you would have a different ringtone. Your pal next to you might be, or you might have a nerdy kid in the group who is, so you'd all have different ringtones. When we move even further forward in time, coming up to the present day, that went on to be used in battle. Even Tutankhamun was buried with two trumpets made of silver to scare off any evil spirits that he might uncover in the afterlife. You can actually make a carnix really easily if you play a P bugle or a P trumpet or a P bone or even a P buzz. You can use a mouthpiece, some hose pipe, and you can create your own carnix. So even in the very first Olympic Games, trumpet playing was an event. How fast could you do your war signals? How loud could you do your war signals? And there's even talks about people had the faces bandaged so that the cheeks didn't explode. When we move forward in time, we come to the Renaissance period, which is our very first period. What was it like back then? We're talking 1300 to 1600. The word Renaissance, not only is it difficult to spell, but it comes from the word which means rebirth. It's a rebirth of everything. The artists that we had at the time were Michelangelo, Donatello, Leonardo, and Raphael, also the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We had our famous painting there, which was the Mona Lisa. If you've seen that painting, she doesn't look very happy, but the Mona Lisa was from the Renaissance period. The printing press was invented, and this was critical for music because all of a sudden we could start to print music, which meant that rather than me singing a tune to somebody or playing it on my instrument and them taking it onto the next town and somebody else playing it, and gradually it been forgotten down the line or slightly changed and modified from the original, all of a sudden we could print that. But it was so expensive that it was only available for the super rich people. The famous people around at that time, we just had William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, we had William Shakespeare, we had the artist painting Mona Lisa, and we also had Henry VIII. He became King of England in 1509, and he was only 18, he was very, very young. He also had 6 wives as well. Henry VIII actually wrote Pastime, a Good Company, and although some people do think that he might not have written it, some people think that Henry heard it, liked it, and thought, I'm going to have this as my own piece, and probably chop the heads off, because he had a habit of doing that. So Henry VIII claimed to have written Pastime, a Good Company, along with other tunes like Greensleeves, but he did have a habit of writing these pieces of music to attract his wives, his many wives, that not all, anyway, that's another story. At this stage, only boys went to school. So until 1500, it was just boys. Girls stayed at home and learned how to manage the households. In 1500, one of the very first girls' school opened up in Edinburgh. We hadn't really even discovered America in this period as well. It was only Christopher Columbus did his big voyage in 1492. So the snacks at the time, we used to eat pork belly fat. So it used to be cooked up and fried up, so it was nice and crispy. You can still buy a similar thing, which is called pork scratchings in pubs, and you can sometimes see them in the local supermarket. But chocolate had not been discovered yet. So it was a world without chocolate. We know these instruments first came across with the previous Henry VII's wives, all the way from Portugal. She brought a troupe of musicians with her, and they brought things like trombones, which back then were called sackbuts, or sac-à-bouche, which means push-pull mouth, and the trumpets as well. So we knew these instruments kind of evolved a little bit before the Renaissance period, but how did they fit into our music as we go along? Trombones were used in sacred music. Sacred music was music for the church. It was music where you would sing different sections of the Bible, you would sing through like requiems, you would sing anthems for different times of the year and things like that. And the trombone was there to help accompany the choir, to help everybody pitch the notes on their part. So you had 4 trombones. You had a bass, a tenor, an alto, and a soprano, which mimics the same human voice setup that we would have as well. The other kind of music we had is secular music. That's music to dance to, music for the home. And what we would do with that is we would have songs, we would have little ballads, we would have all sorts of little learning pieces for keyboards. We'd have instruments like the crumhorn, the cornetto, which was coming towards the end of the Renaissance period. It was trumpets and trombones, sackbuts, that changed music history. Something happened and it went viral. Claudio Monteverdi in Italy had just put on stage his musical drama called Orfeo. And at the start of Orfeo, he took trumpets from the battlefield, these instruments of war, and he put them into the theatre. And he played the incredible toccata. This is it in the background, you'll hear it. But it's not the trumpets that made the whole of Renaissance music change over. It was down to the fact that he then used the traditional instruments playing exactly the same note, and then this went viral, this spread, and all of a sudden Orfeo became the first piece to use a military war instrument inside the orchestra and inside the theatre and inside art music. And then we moved quite quickly from Renaissance music into Baroque music.